Hello, 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 and welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Football Forecast, which, of course, is a podcast talking about fantasy football. And I'll tell you, I think we're going to have the greatest show in the history of the Yahoo Fantasy Football Forecast today. Not just because we have Scott Pianowski hosting, but we have Andy Behrens wearing the Chicago garb. He's already gone all in on their first-round pick, and we're getting his chestnuts today. We're going to break down what's gone on in the NFL draft, focusing on rounds 2 and up. Of course, our Liz Dalton and Matt, our esteemed colleagues, already broke down round 1 on Friday, so go check that out if you need to get a refresher course. We will talk a little bit about the quarterbacks in round 1. But first of all, from the weight room in Chicago, he just broke all the Illinois Pro Day records. The best athlete, I think, came out of Illinois, out of Iowa in about 30 years. Andy Behrens, aloha.
Hello. Yeah, I'm excited. This was as satisfying an NFL draft as, just speaking purely from the perspective of a Bears fan, as I can recall. We started with the Aaron Rodgers fiasco, which is just a gift that is going to keep on giving. And then they did a thing that I didn't expect them to do, and I'm really excited about it. I love Justin Fields. I could not be happier with this draft.
Yeah, it was a draft of things that normally we don't see. I mean, I'm a Patriots fan, and they never eat their birthday cake. They always say, "Oh, we'll save it for next year." They trade down, they trade down, they trade down again. Dave Gettleman, famously with the Giants, never trades up. All of a sudden, never trades down. All of a sudden, Gettleman is trading down like crazy. We Patriots took a quarterback in the first round. We'll talk about that a little bit. But again, Liz, Matt, and Dalton did talk extensively about round 1. But because you're a Bears fan, because I'm a Patriots fan, and because our teams just added quarterbacks, I just feel like the world is demanding our hot takes on where our franchises are going. So, yeah, I don't know when the Super Bowl shuffle is going to be remade into a field shuffle or something like that. But tell me where the Chicago Bears franchise is headed now.
Yeah, well, first of all, they're going to be recording. If they go like 2-0 in the preseason, it's time to re-record the shuffle, I think. That's kind of where I'm at. At least with respect to the Bears, we have had I don't know if I want to call it full news or reporting, but we've had, the story has developed a little bit further since Liz, Matt, and Dalton podcasted, in that we had Ian Rappaport very directly saying that the Bears' intention was to play this out like, out that 1 year of Alex Smith playing ahead of Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City. And that just strikes me as so untenable for the Bears. Like that's a nice idea, but that Chiefs team was good. That Chiefs team won the division. They won 10 games. They were a very good football team with Alex Smith. There's no indication that the Bears are going to be a very good football team with Andy Dalton. It's not as if every other piece is in place and this is a clear division leader, and the clamor for Justin Fields, like, everybody's as excited as I am or more excited about Justin Fields. There's unanimity on this, and the fan base is going to want to see him as soon as possible. I know he technically goes 11 in the draft, but he could have very well been a top 3 pick. In fact, I would argue actually that if he had just opted out last year, he would have gone higher in this draft, right? He was coming off an incredible 2019 season. So, I'm ready to see him. I've seen enough Andy Dalton over the years, and he's fine. He's totally fine. But, this franchise just sort of flipped the script in an amazing way. There was absolutely no buzz around the Bears at all. And now there's a ton of buzz around the Bears, and they're just not going to be able to sit Fields for the full season.
Wow. I mean, Andy pulling out the heavy $10 words. And I'm not sure we can say this on the podcast. So producer Brett will have to make a call on that. But you make a great point. You make a great comparison with outlining how different it was with Kansas City, where, I think Alex Smith was fantasy quarterback for the year that they basically gave Patrick Mahomes a post-grad year. They said, okay, look, just learn, get your feet wet, get housing set up, learn where everything is in the building. And, we saw him make that debut in week 17, playing with almost a skeleton crew next to him at Denver, and he looked great. And that was a really excellent tip-off that Patrick Mahomes was going to be something special. And, of course, he blew the league up the next year, won MVP. I think the Patriots might be in a situation where maybe they could be a playoff contender with Cam Newton. I've kind of had it with the Cam Newton experience. And look, the guy, he won an MVP. He was, I think, definitely a win as a number 1 overall pick. He went to a Super Bowl. Had plenty of great regular season, NFL seasons and fantasy seasons. But he's been beat up a lot. there aren't great skill position players in New England. I know they've probably the best tight ends in the league if you want to look at a tandem. Not that they have anybody who matches up with Kelsey or Kittle. I'm not silly like that, but they have two really good tight ends that they've invested in. I don't like the receivers here. I'm curious. I get the idea that they're going to start the year with Newton, and that's a matter of, okay, if they are 4-5 at one point, why wouldn't they want to play Mac Jones and just get started to whatever the next incarnation of your team is? It's interesting that both of you talked about how Fields easily could have gone as high as 3, right? I think he was in play at one point with the 49ers. I mean, the 49ers seemed to have a lot of fun teasing us about what they were going to do. At one point, Mac Jones in the betting market was like -400, -500, something like that. So, they did a nice job. And look, no team should ever tell us anything about anything. I get it. I mean, what's the incentive? What are you gaining from that? I think most teams know that the media is to be used and distrusted and all that. It's frustrating, but it is what it is. But at least I think both of our franchises can feel pretty good about the idea that we took a quarterback that, had they gone several slots higher, nobody would have batted an eyelash.
Oh, no, that's absolutely true. I'm pretty both teams are in the same situation as well, in that, like, stylistically, the starter is so different from the rookie who we expect to come in, right? So, like, when that transition happens, it's not going to be seamless. It's going to be interesting, and it's going to require great coaching. And I know Belichick is up for it. I know the Patriots are up for it. I have bigger questions about whether Matt Nagy and the Bears coaching staff is up for that exact transition, because it did not go well last year when they tried to go seamlessly from Mitch to Nick Foles.
Yeah, I want to get your take on just how much you like Mac Jones as a prospect. I think he's actually a perfectly fine, solid plus athlete, but we're at a time where the position has become so uber athletic that it's easy to say, oh, okay, well, this guy isn't Kyler Murray. This guy isn't Lamar Jackson. This guy isn't Russell Wilson. This guy isn't Josh Allen. He's not going to blow you away. If they had a combine, Mac Jones wouldn't have blown anybody away at the combine, but I don't think he's Joe Flacco. I don't think he's somebody who, is going to, you need 3 weeks to do the shuttle run. I think he's athletic enough for the position. He's just not going to be at the top of the class in that area. My main concern with him is the receivers he's going to be throwing to. But are you optimistic? Let's be realistic here. Okay, now for every Patrick Mahomes we get in the NFL draft, we get a lot of Andy Daltons, a lot of Joe Flacco's, a lot of Mitch Trubisky's. It's much easier to stink in the NFL or be mediocre in the NFL than it is to be great. But I don't know. For once, the Patriots, again, I talked about, they love to trade down and they love to take guards and tackles and safeties. And they love to take things that don't have immediate juice to a franchise. Like, I'm not somebody who needs to be placated with the exciting fun pick, but it's nice for once that they took an exciting fun pick.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I'm pretty bullish on Mac Jones. And there's a disconnect between, like, what plays really well in fantasy and what wins in the NFL, right? Like, as fantasy guys, we don't even get excited about, like, if a pocket passer is going to throw for 4,500 yards, we're not into it. Like, that's that's a great season.
Did people jump up and down about the Phillip Rivers experience, right? I mean, he had a borderline Hall of Fame career.
Right,
but
absolutely.
We never like had Phillip Rivers programs. We never had like a week of Phillip Rivers. It's just,
and you never won a fantasy league because Phillip Rivers, even when he was, phenomenally efficient, and even in his best years, you weren't winning your fantasy league because you had Phillip Rivers. Now we have all these guys who are also going to run for 500 to 1,000 yards. And so the fantasy conversation is one thing, but clearly a great pocket. I mean, because it's just happened, and you look at the quarterbacks who've been in the Super Bowl repeatedly, they are, like, in very recent years, they're all great pocket passers first and foremost. That still wins in real life, and I kind of think Mac Jones can be that. It's always tough with guys who have. I mean, this is a case of a quarterback who legitimately had better receivers in college. That's not even a joke to say that he had a better receiving core in college than he probably has right now. But we did see him. I mean, he played in the SEC, and we saw Mac Jones get heated up a few times, and he was like, he did okay under pressure. Like, he didn't have the ocean of space around him. And I talked about this with Thor Nystrom a week ago on the pod. Like, he didn't have the just absolute ocean of space around him that Zach Wilson did. Like, we've seen Mac Jones tested by a real pass rush, and we've seen him under duress, and he's coming off a near perfect season. So I'm pretty bullish on him.
And that's what you want to look for. I don't design to be an NFL scout, but you learn about these players by how they do under duress, how they do when they get hit, how they do when they're. I used to joke that Matt Leinart never laundered his jersey at USC. He was always in a clean pocket and throwing to a guy with no defender in the screen. I mean, that's great. Everybody can complete those passes. and you find out about these players when they actually get hit in the NFL. When Greg Cosell always talks about what is open in the NFL is totally different than what's open in college, and that will determine how successful these guys are. Let's transition to kind of a fantasy breakdown of how the positions spilled out from rounds 2 to 7. Try to get an idea if any of these guys are going to become instant impact players for our fantasy lives. We'll start at the running back spot. I thought Javonte Williams was a great pick. Look, we know that running backs don't go in the first round a lot. There were a couple of them this year. But when Denver moved up to get Javonte Williams moving in front of some teams that wanted to grab him, I thought it was a really nice move. Of course, Denver still has the same problem that I always say, that I love all their skill talent. I don't know what they're doing at quarterback. I'm not a lock guy. We'll see if Teddy can turn into anything. I don't know that a Rodgers trade is realistic, but you would think they would be players in that if that ever became a factor. But I do like Javonte Williams a lot as a pile mover. And also a guy at North Carolina. I like that he split time. I like that he came out early. Age is a big thing for running backs. Like Najee Harris makes me nervous because he stayed in college for a long time. He's an older running back. Javonte Williams is a younger back. He doesn't have that much mileage on him. Pile mover, a guy who doesn't go down on first contact that often. I think Denver made a great pick here.
I thought Denver's draft was a little weird, right? And I thought that they drafted as if they already had Aaron Rodgers on the roster. They just have a funny roster. Like, it's a good defense and it's a good coaching staff, and they have all these skill position players that we like. They have a ready-made receiving core, like just to plug in an adequate quarterback, and you've got a really fun offense. They also very clearly don't have an adequate quarterback on the roster. Like, I don't know how bullish anybody is on Teddy Bridgewater, but he's not, in my view, Teddy Bridgewater is not a top 20 NFL quarterback, and they've sort of behaved as if they have everything and every pick is just a luxury and they're ready to win. And they don't have a quarterback. And I thought they were a serious threat to take a quarterback in the first round. I'm surprised that they didn't do it. Maybe they do still end up with Aaron Rodgers. I don't know. That seems more plausible by the day. But I thought the pick was fine. I think Javonte Williams is a good player. I tried to steer Thor toward this position a week ago, and he wasn't really having any of it. But I do feel like, we look at Javonte Williams and both he and Michael Carter, who both played at Carolina, they had these gaudy missed tackle totals. And when you watch them, they're stepping through a lot of tackle attempts by, I don't mean to slam the conference too much, but you're not wowing me if you evade 10 tackles against Syracuse and 12 against Duke. And there's a lot of film where they look like superheroes, and I get it, but they are not facing anything remotely close to NFL quality competition. And sometimes I see their tape and I think, that is definitely a tackle in the NFL. That run doesn't exist for you in the NFL. And that guy shouldn't have touched you. Maybe it's even a bad sign that became a missed tackle, that he even got close enough to lay hands on you. So he's good. He's really good. He was clearly one of the top 3 running backs in this draft class. I don't mean to slam him, but I do think that when we overemphasize something like missed tackles, to me is the most we really need to contextualize that when we talk about it. Less so in the NFL itself, but when we're talking about it with a college player, who are you facing? That means a lot to me when we're talking about elusiveness in college. I like Javonte Williams. It's not, to me, in my view, it's not the best landing spot because his best case scenario is he's splitting a workload with Melvin Gordon. It obviously kneecaps Melvin in a big way. And it's not, Javonte could have landed in Atlanta or with the Jets or even plausibly with the Steelers or Dolphins, where we would have said, oh, he's got a shot at 250 touches, and he just doesn't have a shot at that here.
I have 2 takeaways for that. One, your very reasonable take on the quality of competition that North Carolina faced and how good somebody may be coming out of that. I have to feel there's a little bit of Trubisky PTSD that's coming out there. You've seen a player excel in that conference before, and you're like, oh man, what happened in the NFL? So I think we have to speak to some of that.
I just want to say that arrow hit its mark. You're probably right. I feel the truth of what you've just said.
Yeah, there's some truth in that. I also want to be careful with this whole draft experience and how we apply it to fantasy, especially when we get past round 1. I think it's called the endowment effect. I may have that wrong, but there's a theory that the longer you wait for something, the higher the expectations are for that. Like, if I happen to see you on your birthday out of the blue and said, "Oh, hey Andy, I got a birthday present for you," you'd be like, "Oh, great, thanks," and you'd open it up, and that would be it. But if I told you 9 months in advance that I had a birthday present for you, then you'd have 9 months to think about it, and expectations get placed on it. It's like if you walk into a movie that you're interested in, okay, maybe the movie's great, maybe it's not. But if you get to a movie after everybody else has seen it and they've told you it's the greatest movie in the world, then if the movie isn't the greatest movie in the world, you walk out, you're kind of disappointed. I think what happens sometimes with fantasy prospects, especially when we've seen, because for years the play was just fade rookies, let somebody else be the sucker. And the last few years, we've seen the college game, the pro game, they're moving closer together, and a lot of rookies have been impactful right away. And now we have more rookie and draft and combine, when there is a combine coverage, than we've ever had before. You can't get away from it. And I think if you're going to spend all this time analyzing prospects, I don't think you're going to come away with, "Oh, these guys all stink, don't draft any of them." I think there's just a natural inclination to think that somebody is special in here. And as a group, I don't think I'm going to be drafting a lot of rookies. I don't see that many guys who are going to make a splash. I'm sure I'm missing some players who maybe landed in better spots than I realized, or maybe what they're really good at was shielded in college and it's going to be unleashed in the NFL. But I don't think my seasonal teams are going to maybe have as many rookie players that they might normally. I look at the next running back who's on our sheet here, Trey Sermon, who perfectly good player at Ohio State, no question of competition there. He goes to San Francisco, and we know what Kyle Shanahan loves to do. He loves to throw a platoon. He's like the Tampa Bay Rays, bullpen. He throws it at you. Okay, we got all these fire-breathing dragons, and one day it could be Mostert, one day it could be Sermon, one day it could be Wilson. There's just going to be a lot of there's going to be a lot of players who have 135-yard, 2-touchdown games. I don't know how you're ever going to be able to time the market with that.
Yeah, Sermon is tough for me because on the one hand, I can make a case that this draft choice is a signal that they just have very little faith in Mostert's ability to remain healthy over a full season. Obviously, they like Jeff Wilson quite a bit, and he played some wonderful games last year. You're right; they do seem to be able to get 150 yards out of almost anybody. So that's a thing. I really like Trey Sermon, and some of this is just, I get fixated on individual games, but obviously his performance against Northwestern was one of the, and then Clemson too. Like, we talk a lot about how great Justin Fields was against Clemson, but Trey Sermon blew him up as well, over 200 total yards, like I think 250 total yards. So in the biggest games that they played, he was just absolutely phenomenal. And there is a scenario in which Trey Sermon gets like 180 touches, 200 touches as a rookie, and could plausibly be, if not the number one rookie back, the number two rookie back. Like I'm having a tough time. So like I wanna just have a quick knee jerk, hey, here's my top 5 rookie dynasty picks, and I'm really sweating, Trey Sermon versus Travis Etienne versus Michael Carter. Like it's a tough group because you've got the perfect setting for a player like Trey Sermon, but maybe not the route to a huge workload. And then you've got some of these other guys who are, maybe the setting isn't great, but they have a path to 250 touches.
Yeah, let's talk about Carter, the other North Carolina back who landed with the Jets in round 4. Doesn't seem like a lot of competition there. So maybe it's plausible that he could be a better fantasy player right away than Williams, just because he's going to have an easier path to touches.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel. Like the Jets had a good, but in some ways perplexing draft at a couple of spots, and we'll get into that when we start talking about the receivers, I guess. But I really like the Carter pick, and they waited too. Like they didn't, the Jets were a real threat to take a running back, at the top of round 2. They waited. They still got a really good player in Carter. Actually, for what it's worth, like he outrushed Javonte Williams, and Javonte Williams is everybody's favorite player at the running back position out of this draft. Carter outproduced him, and also had a crazy, and I think this has a lot to do with conference, but also had a crazy missed tackle total last year and was plenty evasive and plenty productive. So I think Carter's really good. Tevin Coleman, who's like the other main back with the Jets right now, is the one guy who never blew up in San Francisco, right? So like if that's your main competition, I feel really good about Carter's chances to get a pretty huge workload as a rookie. And I think he's in that conversation for like the number 2 rookie dynasty back.
I also thought the Eagles did get a pretty good value in round 5 when they took Kenneth Gainwell, who had a 2nd or 3rd round grade on some other people's boards. Of course, there's already some good running back talent in Philadelphia. Do you think Gainwell could be a fantasy factor this year?
I feel like I'm going to have within the fantasy community maybe a contrarian take on this. I thought it was I thought this was really good news for Miles Sanders, because there were plenty of rumors from Philadelphia reporters in the days leading up to the draft that they could take a day 2 running back. And obviously the day 2 running backs were guys like, Javonte and Carter and Sermon. Trey Sermon landing with Philadelphia would have been a real threat to Miles Sanders. And I think Kenneth Gainwell is a real threat to Boston Scott. I don't think this impedes Miles Sanders in any sort of huge way. Now, the crux of that argument, though, is whether Miles Sanders can catch the ball. Because that's what we think Gainwell can do really well. He is not an inside runner. He's one of these guys that put up great stats like everybody at Memphis does. There's always a Memphis running back that we fall for, and sometimes it's legit and sometimes it's not. But
Antonio Gibson was legit, sure.
Right. Gibson, legit. And then we're still kind of waiting on Darrell Henderson, right, who was going to be a superstar by now. And there's just it's a team and a system that is going to produce some guys. We know that Gainwell can catch the ball. We also know that 2019 Miles Sanders could catch the ball. He had 50 receptions. And 2020 Miles Sanders could not catch the ball. He had a bunch of drops, and in fairness to him, a bunch of inaccurate passes too. So it's one of those, we need the real Miles Sanders to emerge. I do feel strongly that Miles Sanders with the ball in his hands is much better than Gainwell. So I don't think he's a huge threat. But it's not really important what I think. It's more important what the Eagles think. But I just think the fact that they waited until pick 150 to take a back tells you a lot.
Sure. Yeah. Sanders would have to, anybody owning Sanders in a dynasty league got what they wanted. There wasn't a first 2-day pick in the backfield. What's always going to be hard for offenses that have athletic mobile quarterback, assuming Jalen Hurts is the quarterback in Philly, I don't know why he wouldn't be. It's a gift and a curse. He can run, and he's going to stretch the field, horizontally, and should open up running lanes for Miles Sanders. But he's also, a lot of times when passing plays break down, you would think he would run. It's very easy to see Hurts scoring anywhere from 5 to 10 rushing touchdowns, which are touchdowns that a Sanders can't score. So it's one of those chicken egg things where I think when you see a running back link up with a mobile quarterback, it's going to be somebody saying, "Oh, great! Look, the lanes are going to be so wide, and the other team has to worry about the legs of the quarterback, and that's so great." And it's like, well, yeah, but a lot of those dividends go to the quarterback too, So I never really know if that's more of a net positive or a net negative for the primary back on those teams.
I will say that every game that Miles Sanders played with Jalen Hurts, and this may have only been 3 games, but I want to say that he went over 80 scrimmage yards in all of them. Had a huge game in Hurts' first start, so it was the best game of Sanders' season. I want to say. I don't have the box score in front of me, but he was really good with Hurts. So if we get 14, 15 games out of Miles Sanders with Jalen Hurts as the starting quarterback, I feel that can lead to 1,500 scrimmage yards.
If you have a take on these teams, I'm curious to hear it. There were some franchises that had, I thought, a screaming need at running back that didn't do anything about it. Miami really didn't do anything special at running back, or Atlanta. Gaskin is still in Miami. We saw Ahmed had a moment or two late last season. I guess Mike Davis right now is at the top of the Atlanta running back depth chart. I can't imagine that's going to be true come September, but you never know. And remember, look, if there's one position where undrafted players, for skill guys, you want to really pay attention to, it's running back. I mean, Arian Foster wasn't drafted. Terrell Davis went in round 6. This is a position, especially as it's been de-emphasized in the draft, there's going to be quality players who are added and signed. Do you have a Miami or Atlanta takeaway as we kind of try to figure out what they're doing at running back?
Yeah, huge win for Myles Gaskin, who was actually just really, really good on a per game basis last year. And I know he didn't give us a full season, but he averaged over 90 scrimmage yards per game. Maybe the touchdown total wasn't exactly what you wanted it to be, but he was really productive as any team can possibly hope for. He's not an expensive player. So I thought actually Miami had a pretty good running back situation overall last year. That was certainly not the reason that, if you're a Dolphins fan, you're not pointing at the backfield and saying that's what's holding us back. That's why we didn't win the division. So I thought they exercised pretty nice discipline there. It's just a huge win for Gaskin as a fantasy asset, as a dynasty asset. I thought he was one of the clear winners of draft weekend. And I doubt that they add somebody because they had opportunities. They certainly had plenty of picks, and they could have easily snagged one of those top 4 running backs. Didn't do it. I think it's a clear win for him. And there's also not that many guys lingering out there, right? It's like Adrian Peterson still wants to play. Maybe Duke Johnson is still out there, but there's not some shoe that has yet to drop that is going to completely change a backfield. So I think both Mike Davis and Myles Gaskin are pretty safe. I think Gaskin is the guy who really has the workload to himself while he's healthy. I would be a little bit surprised if Atlanta sees Mike Davis as just a 20 touch all season sort of guy, but I do believe that Miami sees Gaskin that way.
Let's transition to the receiver position. And this is where I think fantasy managers need to be careful, because the last few years we saw A.J. Brown was a major hit in the second round. DK Metcalf looks just generationally great. He was a second round pick. Terry McLaurin went in the third round in his draft class. And so I was really excited to see what maybe the second or third round of receivers looked like. That was the day I was on staff to write about the draft. It was the second and third round. So I was hoping some splashy stuff happened. We saw a handful of receivers go in that area, but I saw a lot of slot guys, a lot of kind of gadgety players, a lot of players who you have to manufacture touches for. Not that these guys aren't talented, not that they don't run fast, not that they weren't productive in college. But if I think somebody's looking for the next A.J. Brown or DK Metcalf, and maybe that's just an unfair comp because those guys are Pro Bowl level players. But I think if people think, oh, the second round, these guys are really first round picks and they're going to be stars, I think that might be a mistake. I think these guys might go collectively overdrafted as a group, but let's look at some of them individually. Look, the Jets, they finally got rid of their quarterback. They got rid of their coach. They're starting over with a quarterback now, a rookie quarterback who I think is going to be really good. But you got to get him some pieces. So they bring in Elijah Moore, who I guess is going to be their slot guy. Jamison Crowder was not the problem with the Jets, but I guess maybe he's just superfluous in the new version of this offense. And I also think Denzel Mims, if healthy, could be a really good player in year two. What did you think of Moore going to Gotham City?
Yeah, first of all, it's a really good point that you first made in the takeaways piece that you wrote off the draft for Saturday. Like, and it's something that Thor and I talked about again last week, that second tier at wide receiver this year, it just happened to be the way the class was shaped. It is all slot guys. It's all little guys. It's just not, there just wasn't very much size, which is why we ended up talking about like Nico Collins and Marshall with Thor. There's just not a lot of size in this class among the better prospects. The one guy who really just sort of like his pro day numbers or whatever sort of leap off the page to you is Rondale Moore, who's like 5'7", 5'8", and is definitely a slot guy, right? So there's just no like physical freak of the DK Metcalf sort to be found here, who's just going to be that, jump ball winning, deep route running, splash play guy on the outside. That just wasn't present in the second and third tiers of this draft, at least in my view, and I think it played out that way. Elijah Moore, this is why I was talking. And look, the Jets had a good draft, and they have a quarterback that they feel good about. They have a running back they should feel good about, and Elijah Moore's really good. He's like the weird, the rare sort of explosive slot receiver. He's a really fun player, and now they have all these skill guys that are all sort of on the same timeline. But they do have they got Jamison Crowder, and now all I want to do is look around the league and find a new home for Jamison Crowder. Like that was my takeaway on Elijah Moore. I really like him. Like, I think he can be really good, but as long as Jamison Crowder is on that roster, he's such a good like security blanket receiver. And I know he's not the most explosive guy in the league, but he's just a living, breathing first down and a very competent pro. And there's a couple of teams out there, like, I don't know, if Jamison Crowder went to the Lions, he'd get 140 targets. If Jamison Crowder, not that the Jets are going to give him to the Patriots, but if he became a Patriot, he would certainly be their number one receiver.
God, they would need him. They'd love him. I would love to see him on Kansas City, which all of a sudden has a need for another reliable receiver. They're very top heavy, that offense right now.
Yeah, and I think it was mutual friend Mike Salfino that was tweeting about, man, the Jets, like right after the Moore pick, the Jets should be looking for a third round pick for Crowder, because that guy's good. Like, he's really good, and he can, he's a veteran. He's run every route. Like, he can help a great team right now. I hadn't even, Kansas City wasn't even one of those teams that I was looking at, but of course, like, he would be such a great chief. He can help anybody right now, and apparently he's expendable, which surprises me.
Well, I guess with Arizona taking Rondale Moore out of Purdue, I guess they've admitted the Andy Isabella situation hasn't worked out. You like to see it. I'm torn on this because I like to see Arizona adding offensive skill talent. And I'll admit I was nervous when they added Hopkins, and he was great right away. But I still don't trust Cliff Kingsbury, and I still think there's a lot of room for improvement with the passing game with Kyler Murray. Do you think Rondale Moore can be a fantasy factor in his first season?
I do. I really do. Like I like this player a lot, and difficult because you have to really harken back with Rondale Moore. Like he had his superhero season in 2018, and at this point, 2018 feels like 1975 to me. That feels like a really long time ago. That was a lot of stuff has gone down since 2018, but he was so great. He was so great for Purdue right off the bat. Over 100 catches, 1,200 yards, unstoppable player. And he's that guy who just athletically was absolutely off the charts. It's all mitigated by the fact that he's like 5'6" or 5'7" or something like that. He's really small, but we're talking about a guy with a 40+ inch vertical. We're talking about a guy with great speed, and how to best phrase this. He fits what was wrong with Arizona's offense last year, which is, sometimes they'd get super horizontal, right? And they weren't, for as exciting as their skill players were, they didn't always do a lot of really exciting stuff. And, if they're going to run a lot of that boring horizontal stuff, this is an explosive guy that you can connect with, and he can get you a lot of free and cheap yards. So I feel better. Not that I felt bad about Kyler Murray before, because he's obviously one of those cheat code players at the quarterback position, but this is an explosive dude. I don't think he's going to come right in and be, 80 catches and 1,000 yards. I think he's probably initially, and this is the way I spun him for the site when we had to do those quick react videos. Like, I think he's more of a best ball guy. I think he's going to have like 3 games that are sensational. I think he's going to have 3 games where we're like, oh my God, this is the pickup of the year. And then the next week he's like 2 catches for 30 yards. I think that's probably what you're going to get as a rookie, but long term, I like him a lot with Kyler.
Looking at some of the other names of the receivers who went in this pocket, Seattle took Western Michigan's Dwayne Eskridge, who was in college longer than Blutarski. I mean, I think he was 5 years at Western Michigan. He had some medical issues. I hate to think this way, but when anybody stays in college that long who's a prospect, it just makes me a little bit nervous. It felt like the Rams were like somebody, you ever play in a keeper league where somebody just trades all of their draft picks to try to win a league, and then the next year they have like no draft picks? That was the Rams. I mean, Sean McVay could have played golf all week, and I don't think anybody would have really missed him. They finally stepped into the fray and took, like all these other teams, they took a slot receiver, Tutu Atwell. Carolina did actually get somebody who could profile as an outside receiver, Terrace Marshall Jr., who was part of that monster LSU passing offense of the last few years. So he already knows Joe Brady, had some injury concerns last year, but I think he may have the highest upside of everybody in this second round. Of these guys, is there anybody specific who catches your fancy, or if you want to comment on all of them, go ahead. I give the board to you.
Yeah, I don't think, without multiple injuries that Eskridge can make really any noise next year. Like I didn't even include him in my ranks. Like I was, as we were going along through the draft, I was trying to plug all the receivers into my fantasy rankings somewhere, and I didn't even do anything with Eskridge. I just, he too, because it's Seattle, he might have a couple of games where he pops, but realistically, that's all Lockett and Metcalf while they're healthy. So I don't think.
Also remember last year at the end of the season, they kind of took, if they were letting Russ cook for half a season, they took the kitchen away from him. They went back to, hey, we fixed our defense. Hey, we want to be balanced on offense. Hey, Wilson's taking a lot of sacks. Let's not throw the ball 45 times a game. This could be. I sense that Seattle as their plan is, as they're currently putting up the blueprint, they want to be one of the top 10 run-heavy teams in the league, maybe even one of the top 5 run-heavy teams in the league. And the idea that, we'll make splashy throws to Lockett and Metcalf, but this idea of airing it out 40-plus times a game, that is not who we are.
Yeah, I agree with that. So it's just really difficult to see a path while, and maybe, I don't know, maybe he's the eventual replacement for Lockett. That's probably what they view him as, but I don't think he can make a huge impact without injuries elsewhere in 2021. Atwell, at some point, you're too small, right? Like, I don't think Devontae Smith is too small. I think he's going to be good. Hugely productive college player and all that. Atwell's like 149 pounds. And I don't know what he can be other than a sort of gadgety player and an occasional big play guy. It's, he's fun. He's really fast. They're set at receiver without him. So I didn't see this as a major need. I thought it was a little surprising. So I doubt he makes a lot of fantasy noise. Marshall, to me, is by far the most interesting. I assume that he fell this far because of the foot injury or some other unspecified medical condition that may have popped up late in the process. I don't know. He's better than where he was picked. I know that. And it is a great sign that if you're looking for good signals in terms of his health, it is a great sign that Joe Brady was presumably pounding the table for him, right? Like he has experience with him. Marshall, a player that popped a little bit alongside Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase at LSU. Like he's very impressive. He's one of the few guys in this class who has size. He's got obviously a connection to his OC. So I like a lot about this. I really liked, Sam Darnold is kind of a punchline of a player, but man, this Sam Darnold's had a really good few days. They picked up his 5th-year option, which has to be a good feeling, right? So he got paid a little bit. He got a little bit more money, and then they add Marshall to a receiving core that's already really good, and they pick up one of the offensive linemen who gave Zach Wilson all that space, the kid out of BYU, so Christensen. So just a really good draft for Carolina for Sam Darnold's purpose. Not that, but what does it mean? It means that I move Sam Darnold from like QB 28 to QB 25 or something like that. But there's also a guy who surprises us every year. There's a team that surprises us every year, and a little part of me thinks that maybe it could be Sam Darnold.
I'm very open-minded to the idea that Sam Darnold could be good. First of all, my big Darnold takeaway is we don't know what he is yet because he went to the Jets and everything that possibly could have gone wrong, total wrong coach at the time. The offensive line stunk. He had injuries. Then he got mono of all things. Who gets mono in their 20s?
This guy did. I did.
Okay. Well, you were always kissing all the co-eds at Iowa. I'm sure that's what part of that was. But the sorority, you blame that on the sororities of the University of Iowa. I'll just leave it at that. But
I caught every childhood disease in college, by the way. I got chicken pox in college. I got a lot of weird stuff in college. Really?
Okay. You were the injury I guess injury prone is a real thing when you're talking about Barons. I hope you're able to write through it. Because writers, writers don't have sick days, Andy.
No, I missed a lot of co-ed flag football because I had weird medical conditions. Yeah.
I heard that's why. I thought they actually ran you off the team for some character concerns, but I could be wrong on that. Darnold could not have a worse hand. He was basically handed the 7-2 offsuit with the Jets, and now he goes to Carolina with a coach we like, with receivers we like. They traded Teddy Bridgewater. They did not draft another quarterback. I mean, I think we knew they probably weren't going to, but until they don't do it, it's at least a slight possibility. So we're going to find out if Sam Darnold's good or not. He's still younger than Joe Burrow. I don't hear anybody rushing to judgment on Joe Burrow after one season. Yeah. I think I'm open-minded to the idea that Darnold could be a good NFL player, and I'm not giving up on him yet. Just to clean up some of the other receivers who were drafted in the pockets where we have to consider them for fantasy. I don't know if anybody interests you here. Nico Collins went to the Texans. As far as I'm concerned, if they were to disband the Texans or just put them on hiatus for a year, I wouldn't mind. I don't think anybody would miss them. It's just a lot of things have gone wrong with that franchise. I don't know how Green Bay is going to make it up to Aaron Rodgers, but they did draft Clemson's Amari Rodgers, same name. He's even got the D in it. So, maybe they can get Aaron Rodgers off the game show circuit and get him back. Man, you must be having so much schadenfreude with the Packers. I know you mentioned it earlier. And Detroit, who their receiving group is a factory of sadness. Not that Jared Goff is going to elevate anybody. They did hook up with USC receiver Ross St. Brown. So maybe let's go to Melissa Caskey, my USC scout, and see what she thinks about him. She was telling me when Juju Smith-Schuster came out, she was telling me to draft him on my fantasy teams. And of course, I ignored Melissa for a year or two. And by the time I locked into Juju, I'd already missed the boom on that. So nonetheless, I will be pinging Miss Caskey and seeing what she thinks about St. Brown. Any of these guys tickle the fancy of Andy Behrens?
I thought Green Bay would make a run at Elijah Moore. I was really surprised that didn't happen. That seemed natural, and they didn't do it. It seemed like the sort of olive branch that you would want to extend to Aaron Rodgers if you're really serious about,
They're so stubborn, man. The more people tell them they're wrong about their receiver plans with drafting them, they double down on being wrong.
Yeah, and maybe they view the fact that they made, they've now made a couple of really deep playoff runs that didn't get them to the Super Bowl. Maybe they view that as validation of their approach, whereas everybody else looks at it and says, my God, if you just would have drafted for need ever, you probably would have been there, right? That would have been you playing the Chiefs
on the Packers.
Yeah, I mean that's what they've passed on. Like it's shocking to me, and I like Alan Lazard, but he's clearly physically, in terms of ability, he's not on the level of the guys that we see going like late first, early second round.
And I know this point's been made a million times, but it's not just that the receivers that they've passed on, but they've passed on them to take vanity picks that don't even help the team right away. If they were saying, okay, well, we're not going to take a receiver because we need this tackle, we need this edge rusher, we need this cornerback. Fine. you're taking a clipboard holding quarterback who's not going to play and a third string running back who doesn't move the needle at all for your offense. I mean, he'll play more this year, but you were making vanity picks. You're making like, oh, we're all set. We'll just, go down to like option 17. I don't know. I know this has been played out over and over again, but I'm of the 99% who throws up his hands and say, what the hell are the Packers doing? But hey, maybe Amari Rodgers can take a sad song and make it better.
I will also say of Detroit, this didn't do anything for me at all. And I know that some people were trying to make a case for St. Brown as somebody who's going to see a bunch of targets, and maybe because the receiving core is terrible. But like weirdly, I thought that Brashad Perriman was a winner of the draft, because I don't think there's anybody on Detroit's roster who other than TJ Hawkinson is a threat. Tyrell Williams is a nice theoretical player who has not been on the field a lot. And there's nobody else there. So, like, as things stand right now, TJ Hawkinson is probably going to finish, if he's healthy this year, he's going to finish top 3 at his position in targets. And Brashad Perriman is going to see a target total that he probably doesn't deserve, which is why I think of this team as a good spot for Crowder, because Crowder's targets would just be unlimited if he were a Lion.
I will say this, Perriman's one of those guys, I wish we could just do his career over with the injuries he's had, the bad luck he's had. He's been with, this is the 5th team he's been on. He flashed for a moment in Baltimore. He had that really nice finishing kick in Tampa Bay when everybody was hurt 2 years ago. Seemed like he was hurt from the moment he landed with the Jets. So I just like to see him once have a full season, get 125 targets, and let's figure out if this guy can play or not.
He's a candidate, not that this really ever happens, but he's a candidate to do one of those Brandon Lloyd 7th or 8th year breakouts someday if he ever gets himself in the right situation.
Right. Well, I mean, we saw Devontae Parker do that, kind of have the late in career breakout. And now he may be the number 3 receiver on that loaded Miami roster. I guess we're going to find out finally if Tua is any good, because he's got all the toys to play with. Not a lot of juice for the quarterbacks after the first round. Of course, we're going to look back to this draft, 5 first-round quarterbacks and 3 up front. So there's going to be a lot of talk. There's already been a lot of talk about those guys. We'll continue to talk about them. And, of course, we talked about Fields and Mac Jones earlier. Just in passing, and we don't need to go deep on any of this, but the Buccaneers, with the idea that Tom Brady may not play till he's 60, they took Kyle Trask, staying in state with Florida. Minnesota took Texas A&M quarterback Kellen Mond round 3. So I guess Cousins, again, maybe a year or 2 left there, and then they move on. So a guy you're looking to. I think most teams would like quarterbacks to play right away because of the contract is so cheap. It allows you to do other things, but these guys are obviously development quarterbacks. We don't know what's going to happen in Houston with Deshaun Watson. They took Stanford's Davis Mills with their first pick in a draft where they didn't have a lot of picks. They were basically playing golf with Sean McVay for 2 days. So I don't know if Trask, Mond, or Mills interest you in Dynasty, or you have a sweet spot for any of these guys, but I'll throw it over to you.
Well, the biggest thing we learned from this, because Houston took Mills, is that they really don't expect Deshaun Watson to ever play another game for them. Like I had kind of in the just initial set of ranks that we had to do, Deshaun Watson is obviously, it's fraught, right? It's a very difficult conversation because we don't know what goes on with like these. There's like 24 allegations against him, right? He's got serious legal issues. He wanted out of Houston before any of that popped up. I mean, the Mills pick just tells you that Houston has no plans for Deshaun Watson to play quarterback for them again. I think I'm watching a lot of the draft coverage as it went along, and from what I've seen of Mills, I was never wowed by him. I thought he had a tendency to lock in on his guys, and I also thought that some of his best moments on the field were when he was digging his team out of the hole that he put them in sometimes, right? Like there was a little bit of that. Like, I don't know. I don't love him. I get that the Texans had to use that pick on a quarterback that they liked in some way. And so I just think that's what it tells you, that the Watson situation, like I took Watson from like a placeholder rank. I think I had him like 16 or 17 and I just put him at the bottom. Like, I don't know that we're going to see him at all anywhere this year. And I seriously doubt that we're going to see him in Houston. So I thought that was the big takeaway there. Maybe other people already felt that way, but I hadn't quite committed to it. And now I've pretty much committed to it. I think Trask is interesting. He's obviously, if Trask has to play in 2021, it's either, the final game of the season and they've wrapped up everything they can wrap up, or something really wrong has happened. he had a great year with a great supporting cast, right? And I think he's one of these. He's probably ends up one of these guys who needs everything to fall into place, and he needs the great supporting cast, and he needs protection, and he needs all that. But if you give it to him, the numbers can follow. So he's kind of interesting. Mond, obviously not somebody who's going to make an impact this year or next, I would think. I wish I could credit this to its proper source, but one of the draft analysts on either NFL Network or ESPN, I don't know, I was bouncing around, had like some it was probably Louis Riddick, had some good insight on him in that, like, when things were going bad for Mond, it was because his feet and his head were in very different places, right? Like they just weren't in sync. The eyes and the feet weren't in sync, and that happens to him. But he strikes me as somebody that you could coach up, and he could become a really fun fantasy asset down the road. He's, so I'm kind of interested in him. If you're in a dynasty league where you don't care what happens to these guys next year, and you just want a guy to stash, as a late round rookie draft dynasty pick, I think Mond is a little bit interesting.
It's funny. I mean, some of the ways you're describing him, it made me seem like you were describing Cousins, where Cousins is talented enough to be in the NFL, but he really does need the pieces around him. I did think Minnesota drafted well. I think they always are very value-based in their drafts, and they take guys who fall. And I think they could be a good market play to maybe win that division. Look, Chicago and Detroit are rebuilding. I don't see how anybody can dispute that. And maybe there's a big problem with the Packers, who have outkicked their Pythagorean the last 2 years. They've been really fortunate with wins and probably just gotten more of their share of victories than you would think with the component stats. I think the Vikings should be a good value in the betting markets. I'm going to explore that in the next few weeks. Because look, as far as I'm concerned, I don't start looking at futures, and I don't start doing like best ball drafts and everything until the NFL draft happens. I think it's just a little bit too crazy to do this blind without knowing how much personnel is going to shift, who's going to draft what. So I'm going to really dig into that in the next few weeks. And of course, we'll be talking about, I'm sure, a lot of that on this podcast in coming episodes. We're running a little bit low on time with Andy Behrens today on the Yahoo Fantasy Football Forecast. So let's zip through this a little bit quickly. Fantasy, just give me who won the draft for fantasy, whether it be a team, a player, a position at a team, and just give me a draft winner, Andy.
If we're just purely thinking for fantasy purposes, I don't know how you don't like this for, in fact, I'll start at the top of the quarterback ranks. I actually moved Lamar Jackson to my QB1. And not that they took some superstar receiver, but I think the combination of Bateman and Wallace, those were great ads. We've obviously seen Lamar finish as the QB1. I had him like QB3, but I really like what Baltimore added around him. So I think he has a couple of additional weapons that are pretty nifty. Not going to surprise me if Lamar gives us 30 passing touchdowns this year and his usual 1,000 rushing yards, which is just like, I don't know. I was already high on Lamar. I like him a little bit more. Joe Burrow was I think a pretty clear winner because he's reunited with the best receiver in the draft class, who he also happens to have a great deal of rapport with. I think that's great. They also address, you can quibble about the order in which they address tackle and wide receiver, but they did address the offensive line and receiver. So they now have, like, I don't know, who's got a better trio of receivers? Not that many teams. Dallas, I guess, but like, I mean, Boyd, Higgins, and Chase, that's a hell of a trio. So I like the weapons there. Justin Herbert, I like what the Chargers did. Not that they had like splash ads or anything like that, but that's another team that's sort of building from the inside out, and I like his situation now as well.
Yeah, the Chargers are another team. I think I mentioned this with Sammy Reed 2 weeks ago. I think they're a great value to maybe look, if gun to head, I'd have to pick the Chiefs, but when you consider what the odds are, I think the Chargers are probably the best value in the AFC West. So I'm really interested in that. I mentioned Darnold. I wanted to just mention him again. He's got all the stuff to make him successful. If he can't succeed now, it's on him, or he's gotten mono again or chickenpox again or whatever it is. He's having the Andy Behrens Iowa medical curse has hit Sam Darnold. But I think things are set up well for him to succeed. I don't know if it's a winner or a loser. I can spin this either way. I feel like we should just talk briefly about Tennessee. They lost Corey Davis. They lost Jonnu Smith. So Derrick Henry, many carries you can take. A.J. Brown, remember, I used to rail about how they never gave A.J. Brown double-digit targets. I think he has like 2 double-digit targets in his career, or 3, some really low number. And I'm just like, this guy should be peppered with targets the moment he gets off the bus. He's one of those, even when he's not open, he's open. Well, that's going to happen now, unless Josh Reynolds is the most hidden talent in the history of the NFL. So is it a winner or a loser for Tannehill and the Titans? Obviously, they lost Arthur Smith, who was a really sharp coordinator there. I think it's going to be really good for A.J. Brown. I think Henry's going to be Henry, but I worry about the overall efficiency. One thing I think that sneaks up on people for fantasy is even though we want our best players to get the most opportunity, you need the buoyancy, the octane of the offense to keep you moving the ball. And I just wonder if, as great as Henry and Brown are, if the other pieces of the offense aren't good, maybe they're not going to be scoring anywhere near the points, and this becomes like the number 18 offense in the NFL. When the last couple of years, Tannehill's red zone stats have been unbelievable. They've been so efficient at scoring points. So I really could put them in either category. What was your takeaway about Tennessee as they stand right now?
Yeah, I feel bad that I didn't actually mention Josh Reynolds as a winner because I it's not that I think he's a star or some emerging star, but can he do what Corey Davis just did? He can probably get close to that. He's going to have to. Like between Smith and Davis, that's 150 plus targets that have been vacated there, and they can't all go to A.J. Brown. A lot of them can, right? Maybe even half of them can. I don't know. Maybe A.J. Brown is all of a sudden the most heavily targeted receiver in the league or close to it, but the rest of them got to go somewhere. So I think it was a sort of ringing endorsement of Josh Reynolds and to some extent Anthony Firkser, right? Like that's what they're rolling with because they didn't they didn't add really any viable competition for those guys, and there's nobody that you can add in free agency at this point that is going to threaten
what's funny about Firkser? I know he in some areas he's a little bit of a punchline. I think he's going to become what Jonnu Smith was, the totally boring, nobody's excited to draft him.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh yeah, hey, I just got 658 yards and 5 or 6 touchdowns out of this guy. He was perfectly playable, credible. He's not, I don't think there's an upside with Firkser, but I think he's going to be somebody who, if he's on a fantasy roster, you may plug him in, 2/3 of the season. I think he's going to be in the circle of trust, albeit, whatever the tight end 11 is worth isn't really worth all that much. But I think he's going to be somebody who's on fantasy rosters most of the year.
I was going to say the numbers you just threw out there usually make somebody like the tight end 8, Like if it's just touchdowns, like if you score 7 touchdowns, you're definitely going to be a top 10 fantasy tight end. There aren't so many of them. Lord knows there weren't any of them last year. That usually you squeak into the back end of the top 10 that way.
Talking with Andy Behrens today. I'm Scott Pianowski, the Yahoo Fantasy Football Forecast. We had a blast with 3 days of the NFL draft. And now look, hey, get over to Yahoo Fantasy. Our football game is ready to go. We have the best award-winning app, easiest, most intuitive interface to do your fantasy football stuff. So I hope you have fun with that. And if you're into podcasts, man, we got plenty of them. Liz Loza and Eric Edholm have been doing great pre-draft work. Now they're doing great post-draft work, and they'll be back later this week on this program. Want to listen to them. If you're into the college game, the Yahoo Sports College podcast with Dan Wetzel, Pete Thamel, and our old friend Pat Forty. They've been running their three-man weave for years. They've been in college even longer than Blutarski, and they just do a great job with that program. If you're an NBA fan, and who isn't these days, what a fun league it is. Post It Up with Chris Haynes gives you more in-depth conversation in the world of the NBA. He's going to be talking with Kevin Love this week. You're going to want to check that one out. Long Kevin Love fan, back to his UCLA days. So hang out with those guys. Of course, we're social at Yahoo Fantasy. You can catch us on Yahoo Fantasy, Scott_Pianowski, Andy Behrens over on Twitter, and Brett Rader, our fearless producer, for all your Big Brother podcast needs. You want to hang out with him. He also loves start-sit questions, so don't be afraid to throw him one of those.
Position eligibility questions. That's what he loves. Ask him all of your position eligibility questions, please.
Or if you're in a Big Brother fantasy league, I'm sure Brett has the big board that you'd have to draft off. I wouldn't use anything else for that. But for Brett, for Andy, I am Scott. Liz and Eric are coming back in a few days. Hope your team killed the draft like the Bears did. For now, you're out.
Want the epic stuff, the extraordinary stuff, the edge of your seat stuff? You know, the good stuff. With AMC Plus, you can watch the best of AMC, BBC America, IFC, Sundance Now, Shudder, and more. Hungry for horror? Feast on Shudder's chilling originals like Creepshow Season 2 and killer premieres like Train to Busan Presents Peninsula. Got a need for speed? The boys are back with an epic tour of the UK as Top Gear races through a new season. All available on AMC Plus, ad-free and on demand. Start your free trial today at amcplus.com. AMC Plus, only the good stuff.